I believe that we are now live.
Oh,
How
how
about
fabulous.
that?
You may-
Science and engineering very, very slowly triumphing over ignorance and superstition as we make this thing happen. I welcome to folk out there, and welcome to Scientists Stuck Inside with two new faces with us. And Dave and Alison send their fond regrets. They are both working for Astronomy Magazine, and Astronomy Magazine is terribly short-handed right now. And as I am given to understand, someone up the chain of command said, no, you're going to start coming to these meetings instead of doing that silly little webcast of yours. So
They concerned about COVID spreading to other parts of the galaxy?
I think they're concerned about COVID spreading to other parts of the galaxy, something like that. And so we've got a couple of new faces that are great fun. I have known both of these folk for a long, long time. And I accept no blame whatsoever for anything that either one of them might say. Michael Bailey, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Michael Bailey. I'm a stand-up comic and an actor and a former elementary school teacher, now retired. And I think it's going to stick this time. And, and that's those are all the things that I do and continue to do.
All right, Jeri?
I'm an astronomer and also a performing artist. I do dancing and stage work with kind of a historical theater and lots of tech writing. And I try to keep up with what's going on in this world. And heaven knows that's a full-time job.
Yeah. Jeri,
I'm not a scientist, but I believe that science exists. And I point that out.
The believing part is not the thing. It's the demonstrating.
Yes, it's kind of a rarity here in Arizona. So I thought I'd put that out there.
This is not a matter of faith.
I'm a fan of science. I've heard of it.
I will vouch for you, Michael. I will. Michael is being he taught the gifted and talented program in the school where my wife was principal for 10 years, something like that.
Yes. Oh, yeah, a long time.
And a long time. And sort of the running joke in our house was that it will be interesting when Michael tries to teach for a different principal, because my wife figured out long ago that the way that you handle Michael Bailey on campus is you just make sure that people don't run into him when he's walking down the hall, completely oblivious to the fact that there are other people walking down the hall. So,
fools people into thinking that you're thinking.
Fools people into thinking that you're. So was that it? You were kind of doing the Ben Franklin thing of leaving the light on in the window all night.
Oh yes, very much.
Yeah. Okay.
And moving like someone who had somewhere to go.
Moving like someone who had somewhere to go, or something like that. I don't know. Does that constitute being on the spectrum?
Well, I'm on a variety of spectrums. That's just one.
Indeed. Anyway, so what we were thinking about doing today to dive in, okay, it's of course we're going to talk about COVID. What the hell else can you talk about these days? It's kind of like when you are in the Titanic and there is water pouring in through the sides, is probably not the time that you're going to sit there and talk about your last
camels. Yeah, camels in the Sahara. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. On the other end, it might be a good time to sit there and listen to the band that continues to play on. Those must have been truly amazing people to sit there and provide the musical background for the sinking of the Titanic.
I would kind of admire that. Someone saying, yeah, but other than this, what's up?
Yeah. Apart from that, Mrs. Lincoln, how would you like the play?
Exactly. That'd be neat.
It's kind of one of those times. Anyway, I have had an interesting couple of weeks in that regard. I actually made a viral virus video. I put together a thing. Actually, my target for this thing, there's a woman I know who is on a local school board, and she had reached out to me about, okay, help me understand this COVID thing.
Good for
And
her.
so I put together this video where I went through and explained, okay, this is what exponential growth is. And I went through and just kind of talked about the basics, and the main point that I made, I think, at least in my mind, is that, right now there are all sorts of people, in government, in business, and you name it, all sorts of people who are used to the notion that when they say something, it matters, that somehow they have something to do with making the rules. And right now, what they say fundamentally doesn't matter. That you can say, we want businesses to reopen, and you're perfectly welcome to want businesses to reopen. You're perfectly welcome to want schools to reopen. But guess what? Right now, COVID is calling the shots, and COVID is saying, if you try to do those things, I'm going to bite you so hard in the ass that you don't know what to do about it. And so I put together this thing, just sort of trying to talk basic sanity, and it wound up getting, oh God, I don't know. Last I checked, it was up to 26,000 views or something like that, and I got the head of the Arizona Education Association reached out, and we did a live event the other night that got all manner of views. And then I was contacted this weekend. I'm going to talk to the teachers and parents and such in the Fairfax, Virginia district, which I guess is the 10th largest district in the nation, 188,000 students. And then next weekend, I'm going to talk to a national, I forget the name of them, apologies for whoever that group is, but do a national thing. And I'm starting to talk with New Jersey folk and all of that kind of stuff. So I am, for better or worse, I am suddenly finding myself cast in the world of education during the time of COVID as a voice of reason. And that is a little bit scary if I am the voice of reason. I'll just toss that out there.
I agree.
Yeah. So we are in this time where COVID makes the rules. COVID is physics. You can say, I don't like COVID. Fine. I don't care if you like COVID. That doesn't mean that COVID goes away. I'm tired of COVID. Well, congratulations. I would really like to be able to open schools. Wouldn't we all? Hey, I'm getting tired of not being able to run down and get a drink at the bar. Boy, alcohol these days is, I'm with you there. COVID just doesn't give a damn about any of that kind of stuff. And so COVID right now is kind of like physics. You can say, I don't believe in gravity. I find gravity to be a terribly inconvenient thing. I would like to be able to flap my wings and fly. And by golly, I am going to insist that I can do it. But if you jump out of a 22nd story window, you're going to die when you hit the pavement. And COVID is kind of like that. So it's sort of I view an awful lot of the nonsense that's going on right now in the public conversation of this as a lot of people making that hard descent from the 22nd floor toward the pavement, flapping their arms as hard as they can and wondering why in the world they're not flying. So that's sort of the situation that we're in. And again, there are all sorts of consequences about that. But what we decided we were going to talk about today, to be upbeat, here's upbeat in the time of, we haven't gotten our death row reprieve yet, but we're gonna try to be upbeat about it and try to talk about, okay, COVID is a disaster, but at the same time, it has changed the realities of life in ways that bring opportunities. So what might COVID, a bunch of years from now, what might you look back on this time as and say, hey, sure glad COVID came along when he did, because now we're doing such and such. So, Jeri, what do you think?
Well, it's always a good idea to wrench people out of what they're so busy doing. There's so many things, particularly about our culture, that give people no time to stop and think at all. You go from getting your paycheck and your work hours are expanding because people can contact you all the time, and you're running different directions with the stresses that we put on our children to perform in different ways. And if they miss that opportunity, something will, that will close down something for them. And so there's a lot of pushing going on. Nobody ever has a chance to think, well, why are we pushing that exact way? Why do they have to do all those exams to a particular kind of standard? For one example, of my children, some of them have done a more independent way of school, and one wanted to do the straight, classic public education. And of course, he did very, very well at it. I mean, he worked hard and he did do well at it, but he missed a lot of opportunities to develop what his own interests were because of that constant treadmill of observation and assessment. And so there's a place.
Okay, now I'm gonna toss in there that in the midst of all of that, he had you and Robin as parents.
Yeah.
And so you've got an astrophysicist and a I guess at this point now a hardcore software guy who is a truly brilliant individual. Mom's an astrophysicist who does dance and choreography. All right, we have now established that you have a foot on both sides.
But school, like any other job, has its parameters, that have to be dealt with. And I think that's one of the things people are finding that I think is going to be a positive thing. The fact that so many people have had to work from home, I think we're going to begin to come to terms with the idea that maybe far more people than we originally thought could do just that. Maybe the 40-hour work week, isn't set in stone. My son is an accountant. He's been working from home, and I think for him, it's he's able to be more efficient and more effective to get things done more quickly and more efficiently. And
when you can send the kids back to school, the teachers aren't gonna know what happens when the parents come into class that first day and start doing this in the direction of the teachers.
Well,
anyway,
that never lasts very long. But I think. I just think that there are changes in the way we're looking at what work is that will have some positive ramifications later on. I think that that there are a lot of tasks that can be performed that don't require commuting into an office. I think now obviously COVID's a problem, but during flu season and other times of the year, illnesses of all other sorts are an issue. And how much do we really need all the time? To be doing the commutes and the commutations that we're doing with each other that has to do with the workplace. So I think re-examining the workplace and what can be done where with the kind of technology that we now have at our disposal is going to be a positive outcome from all this eventually. I
like the idea that people may get used to the idea that somebody has a little bit more control about doing they've been bored, they've done something that's interesting to them, because to keep everybody to exactly the same schedule is squandering the creativity of people. And it's actually kind of not teaching people how to do that either. It's teaching people to follow directions. And
right.
And we can see all around us that that's not a good idea to have.
So how many
directions?
How many people are going to go back to work after? What do you think? If people who are sitting around figuring out that okay, they can work from home, how many are going to want to go back to work, and how many of those will still want to go back to work when they don't have to go back to work to have their kids in school?
I don't think it'll be an all or nothing answer is my point. I think that, there are a lot of pleasant things about the workplace. There are a lot of pleasant things about collaboration and camaraderie that people experience with the people that they work with. I'm just not sure that it requires 40 hours a week, or it requires people to drive an hour to and from in massive traffic. Already we're seeing in major cities a really positive impact on the environment, that simply has to do with people don't have any place to commute to.
Mm-hmm.
So it just strikes me that there are going to be a lot of problems.
It's not just the air. We found that the quietness has had really positive impact on not just humans, but all all animals and things too. So
Yeah.
and I do agree with you that there are times where, oh gosh, when I would have something and I'd run down the hall to Jeff and he would go, oh, look at that graph. It's you do need things like that too, and the way of interacting together. But the idea that you don't have to do it every single day on
Right.
somebody else's very specific schedule would be an incredible boon to people in terms of getting other things done in their lives and interacting more with their children. And
Well,
Being
I
aware
guess
of the
I have,
flexibility. I don't have to be in your town,
yeah.
to
Yeah.
be a part of your workstation and a part of your team. And I think that we've been forced, and again, sometimes they're slower to adapt technology, but even as a teacher, a lot of the stuff I did as an elementary school teacher in this last term to stay connected with my students, I've retired at the end of the year, but if I were continuing, there were a lot of those things that it occurred to me would be positive to keep doing. A lot of the videos that I was making to instruct my students, I could, be making to instruct their parents as well on what, we're doing together. There's just a lot of those technologies that I think will be extended even after the COVID crisis is over.
All right, Michael, I've got a question for you on that one. I mean, we're in this situation where COVID is calling the shots. And without going into a lot of details now, it would be really, really, really unconscionably stupid to open public schools or universities anytime soon. And I think, all sorts of effort is going into saying, oh, we're going to do hybrid this, and here's
Right.
we're going to go back in person. I think that as we get closer and closer to the date, those plans are going to start fading. Because it's a little bit like saying to people, hey, how would you like to take a nice luxury Atlantic cruise in a couple of weeks? And they say, hey, that's a wonderful idea, I love it, until you pull up beside the Titanic as it is going down and say,
Right.
hop aboard, at which point they're going to maybe think twice about whether that's a good idea or not. But the reality is that for the most part, and for as large a part as possible, hopefully, because we need it to get COVID under control, we're going to be doing the distance learning thing, which means that we've got a bunch of kids at home that now have all sorts of new kinds of needs. And some of those are academic. A whole bunch of those are social, emotional. A whole bunch of those have to do with the fact that, I was saying, Jeri, you've got a couple of major scale intellects there at home to help
well,
kids when they work
they're
there.
old enough and of the right personality to be able to learn from home. But we definitely have to allow for the children for whom that's not a
Well, but I mean, even when they were young, I know who you were as a parent when your kids were young. You know who we were as parents when our three grown kids were young. And so it's a situation where there are already problems with inequities in school.
Yes.
And now we're in this situation where, and we're taking the kids who already have all the benefits and we're putting them in the care of people who are well educated and can work from home and are in a position to do school kinds of things. I'm not trying to take away from anybody else, but I'm just saying on the academic front,
it's not hard for us. It's not hard.
It's not hard for us. And then you have kids who are already on the short end of the stick from a socioeconomic status standpoint, who are now going home to parents who really, to put food on the table means that they do have to go to work at the meatpacking plant. They do have to go to work and work the grocery stores. And I'm not trying.
Oh no!
All I'm doing is I'm stating realities.
Yeah.
So how do we address that in a time of COVID when our hand is completely forced to do the online remote learning thing?
Yeah, well, it's a big question, because obviously the home itself may be very, very happy indeed, just the resources. And I have enough trouble because there's so many of us in one space to find enough place and time for each person to do their coursework and hear it and not have, the budgie going crazy in the background or whatever. And we have and we're remarkably comfortable.
And how many computers do you have in your house?
Yeah, I mean, we have enough, and that's a big difference.
But see, this to me could also be, and I'd like to think that there's sometimes positive things that come from crisis. And this is something we've all known, especially if you're in education, but maybe it will finally drive the point home that certain disparities have to be dealt with in this country. Maybe this is will be the trial by fire that makes us understand that internet access needs to be a public utility, a public service, for everybody now. That things like funding for education, which I was at Governor Ducey sort of dodged the question, but my understanding was one of the things that they're considering is, if you choose online learning, that remote learning will only be funded at like 85%, of a student who's sitting in the classroom, because it's all based on kids in the seats. That maybe we have to start looking at, again, how we fund education in this country and what it means. Because, in a crisis like this, I think that, that some of our time and resources need to be spent, I think, in retooling classrooms so they can deliver both online and live instruction in a more seamless way.
So there are two issues. One is actually taking that grand idea, there ought to be more ways, and turning it into, all right, that means that so-and-so is going to sit here using this kind of software to do such and such and interact with these, And the other is, there are going to be a whole bunch of people who consider themselves very powerful folk who are going to be losers in that transition. I think we are at a point right now where it is completely possible to do what you're describing. And in fact, it is completely possible to do what you're describing from an economic resources.
It's a little embarrassing we haven't done it already.
It's a little embarrassing we haven't done it already.
We haven't even done running water for everyone correctly yet.
Yes.
But, But so how do we go from, and again, okay, I'm gonna run off. You guys both know Susan, our middle daughter, or the second of our daughters. She was talking to Vicky the other night, and was going on, my wife the other night, and was going on, and in the midst of it, she said, "Uh-oh, tell Dad that if he can't find his soapbox, it's because I'm on it." So I said, yes, by golly, the breeding is true here.
Well,
this is slightly aside, but it's not that we don't think people are doing, trying their best to create something that they really want, but there's a difference between really, really wanting something and that thing being safe. I mean, last night I read that in Santa Clara, 40 principals are now in quarantine because the 40 of them had an in-person session talking about how to open schools, and one had COVID. So, so it's not a lack of wanting things that are best for kids. It really is a matter of trying to get the facts.
The American Academy of Pediatrics, who came out recommending that kids need to go back to school. I understand that, yes, it's going to be in a child's best interest to be in that setting. I have no argument with that at all, but I wondered about the helpfulness of that stance at the moment when, but I'm pretty sure their teachers have a right to be safe as well and not, take things home back to their own families and those kids. And I'm thinking, what does it do psychologically when because I have plenty of kids that would be able to make this connection. If you feel like I must have been the one that made grandma sick, because I'm the only one coming in and out of this environment every day.
That statement pissed me off, and there's actually there are other ways to say it, but they're considerably more stern than pissed me off.
I found it unhelpful in the current environment.
If you read that statement, they make some completely obvious things about there are all sorts of consequences of not having kids in school.
Sure.
Yeah, we know that. And then they say, we don't know for sure that kids spread COVID, therefore it's not a problem. And, that if ever there were an taking absence of evidence as evidence of absence, that was
Right.
it. But it's not true that
Well,
there
don't we in
is
fact know that
absence of
the
evidence.
asymmetric people, which would be
Yeah.
the group of which children comprise the largest
Yeah.
segment,
I mean,
are the ones who are spreading it the most?
What we know, I mean, pardon me, Oregon is talking about maybe not going back to school, even though their numbers look good. Why? Because they've discovered that the numbers of infections among Oregon's children are through the roof. And that's happened not because they were in school, but because just, community
Right.
spread. All right. What's going to happen now if you take them and you put them all back in classrooms, which are the ultimate petri dishes? The other problem.
My daughter's a third grade teacher. It worries me very much.
Yeah.
What they ultimately decide.
We know there have been studies that show that kids have every bit as much of a viral load as adults do. We know that kids spread every other disease on the planet, for crying out loud. I mean, how can they not? There are not many environments other than an elementary classroom where it is perfectly normal behavior for the people there to go around licking each other. It's just, that happens. And here the American and someone pointed out, all right, look at these guys. First of all, that association has a long history of being big time Republican donors, and that's just the fact. The other is that if you look at it, they are taking a financial killing having schools closed. And that goes everywhere from the kids not coming in to not having athletic events to be part of, and all of that stuff. And so I look at that American Association of Pediatrics report, and I just want to take somebody and thrash them, because it sounds like, oh, we are these big dispassionate professional experts here, and the statement is just,
to me, the irony too is, I mean, here's
horseshit.
a group essentially talking about how essential school is for the health, education, well-being of Americans' children, but it hasn't persuaded anyone to fully fund education ever.
Right.
We ignore those things fairly consistently when it comes time to pass a budget, especially in Arizona for those things, and yet, that was to me an issue, because it's to me what Dr. Fauci said. I don't know what to say to people to convince them that they should care about each other, because that's really what this comes down to.
The education thing is a little bit like the pro-life. They really, really want to be sure that nobody has an abortion, because they really care about life until the kid's born, at which point, screw them. It's the same thing that you're talking about there. Everybody suddenly is so worried about schools being reopened because it's bad for the kids.
Well, it's hard to see, especially with such a limited budget, which is the current way, that people are spending the money on plans which cannot happen.
Exactly.
And if they do happen, they're going to get shut down almost instantly. So how much better to use the summertime to come up with ways, and just say, we're going to, even if we start online, if the numbers come down, maybe we can do something like the people who really need to go to school can go for 14 days off 14 days to make sure that you got the clusters that might have arisen in the first 14 days or something. But the idea of taking limited resources and just scattering them broad across the field, instead of concentrating them on the places where you actually know you need to spend them.
So
especially in plans that just on their face cannot work.
Complex?
Excuse me?
Have either of you guys had a Cassandra complex for the last few months?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would think that Dr. Fauci just goes home and bangs his head on the wall. To say, it's not like it's mystic prediction. It's the numbers are really quite simple. If today your hospitals are nearly overwhelmed and your doubling time is 2 weeks, in 2 weeks they're going to be 130% overwhelmed. And it really is simple. And if you haven't done anything to stop it, it's still going. The lag time is I suppose, a little hard on humans, but it's not that hard on humans to understand. And of course,
Jeff did an excellent job explaining the concept of exponents in his online presentation, and and I thought my youngsters would have appreciated all those things, and they probably explained it to others as well. That yes, that's.
And Jeff and Vicki and I've also have talked about how it's just. It's pretty ridiculous to take people whose expertise, maybe they are parents on the school board, they are principals, they're being forced to do certain things and make certain decisions, which are actually going to cost people health. They're going to cost people their lives. And to put somebody who has no experience of that kind of decision making in those positions is, I think that's a criminal thing to do.
It is. And I'm trying to, we were talking about that the other day, but what are those meetings like? When someone says, well, if they're going to be online teachers and in-person teachers, do we line up in terms of our pre-existing conditions and age? Are we triaging, where teachers go? How expendable are you? And just the idea of having that conversation. And you're exactly right, Jeri, about, these are not people that are either qualified or certainly being compensated, to make decisions of that magnitude.
And they're not being given the facts upon which to do it.
Well, and when they are, they're being ignored because, it's not just about, there's some question about these things. It's like you said, this is not all that complicated. If teachers go in front of classrooms full of kids, they're going to be taking a risk, at contracting a potentially fatal illness.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it.
And it is a substantial risk. The video that I put together, I ran the numbers, and where Arizona is headed, had we opened up when they, August 4th, then 1,000-person school should count on having a dozen or so COVID positive people. And you think about that, get 1,000 people together with a dozen or so COVID positive folk, and you just set off a bomb.
Well, ironically, if they were on a cruise ship, they would quarantine the cruise ship.
You were on a cruise ship. Exactly.
If they would quarantine that ship and they wouldn't let it dock. So if you're beginning a school year knowing that condition almost certainly already exists, then
and of course in Phoenix you're entirely relying on air conditioning and internal. It's where we are, you could probably have a lot of fresh air, but you can't start the fresh air thing until November.
Yeah. In fact, I am working with a Montessori school that's out in your direction that is examining the possibility of holding classes outside. And gee, if that means that kids show up having to wear their coats all winter, then kids show up having to wear their coats all winter. I still personally am a little dicey about that. I'm on their response team, and I'm the one who always says, well, yeah.
The best plan I've heard of so far, someone suggested, was a plan where you started with a small group of students, let's say a class or a group of, we'll just use a number of 20, and they become like a family. And they stay together at all times. And they've all already started the year with a 2-week quarantine. So there's reason to believe that everybody is virus free in that unit. And anyone that comes into contact that's outside of that unit, is distanced and masked. They go to recess by themselves. They go to lunch, they stay together in all things. And if any child or a family member of a child is sick, that whole unit stays home for 2 weeks. Before they come back again.
I think that could even be charming that you have a little names,
right.
But we're not there.
No,
we could be. Some European places are there, but
it's a massive level of trust that I don't think we could have to.
We've got to get the numbers down to you're down on a down curve before we can. And so that does actually give us some time to set up these ideas and have them in place and ready to go. But in the meantime, it should be trying to make the online experience as much as we can and get our children who need special services to still have those special services.
Okay, so back to that
That's
question.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you wind up at that place where you say, okay, the kids who are doing the online thing need, have all sorts of needs that now have to have new structures and new approaches to meet. So what are those needs and how can they be met? Set aside for the moment the problem that people are going to say, wait a minute, there's not a buck in that for me, I don't want to do it, and just talk about what are the needs that need to be met. Start with the
let me start with
Pediatrics Association.
My
and
aunt,
how do we do it?
My aunt, before she retired, was a speech therapist in Southern California, worked with kids from the Lancaster area, Edwards Air Force Base. So she could have done most of her work one-on-one online. So that's a form where you can still set people up so that they have the appointment with the counselor, the appointment with the speech therapist, or things of that nature. So as long as you're remembering that you need to do that, and don't try to cut that off to make that as important as the fact that they've had some reading instruction time with their teacher. Is one place to start.
Okay. How else, Michael?
Well, obviously I think there's some triage that's necessary. I think that there are some special need kids that, for example, there are some students that there's reason to believe are not in a particularly safe environment in their own home for too long. And I think that, yes, those needs need to be met. And again, it points to, these decades of neglect in those areas, that we have no recourse for those things, that at the very least, at the end of all this, maybe we look at it and say, hey, what if we were a country that cared about its people a little bit, invested more in these structures, so that the idea of mental health, why isn't there, just like there are hospitals, why aren't there larger, institutions that would be able to dispatch, the kind of effective social work and mental health would be necessary to deal with some of these special needs people on a door-to-door, almost individual basis.
Okay,
I think it exists, but it's those are, I think, the resources that need to be gathering and mobilizing, and I feel that they're being lost in this massive shuffle of, yes, but how do we open our doors and take all these children in as if that were possible? And I feel that happens a lot in education, where we spend too much time talking about something that at the onset we know really probably isn't going to be able to happen.
Well, I mean, the other thing that I hear you saying in the midst of that is that a lot of these issues that people are saying, hey, we've got to open schools so we can deal with these issues, schools are not really the right.
That's what I was going to say. Why are these education issues?
Why are these school issues?
Only be education.
Yeah. So why aren't child protective services, and why aren't why aren't
there's an analogy to the police here
to deal with food shortages and that kind of stuff stepping up? Why is it that the schools are the ones who are being told, open your doors because we need you to deal with all of these social problems? That perhaps not a school's problem.
A good thing that comes of this notion of, again, just like I think people are asking about police departments now, are we asking things of those institutions that are not really in their purview to provide? And it's true, just as you were saying, Jill, that school administrators are not trained or equipped to make staffing decisions that deal with, health issues of this magnitude. The same with, so many of the social emotional issues that we just assume teachers will do, just in the same way now, if feeding kids and all that, or in the same way now that we're looking at, these situations with just funding all kinds, that, maybe we need to start looking at where those services, should belong.
And the good thing is that, talking about a good thing that comes from a difficult situation is people realizing that that the condition of everyone matters to everyone. I mean,
Yes.
here we're seeing that it's in everybody's interests to do better than we're doing. And in the meantime, with funding and the repurposing of educational facilities, we could take care of it there, given that we had the people who could learn from home learning from home.
Yes.
I mean, even the UK
Yes.
has had a lot of trouble, but at least that they did actually keep the schools open to the people who needed that space, and they spread
Exactly.
it a lot.
That's where the question should be right now. Who do we have to deal with in this way? And schools don't want to get into trouble, and they don't want to conflict with parents. And so there's a tendency of saying, we're just going to make everything available and you pick what you want. And that's not really what needs to happen here. What needs to happen is, we need to start with what's, again, a certain triage of children and their needs. And
since it is not coming federally, it needs to come from each state. We were talking a little bit about being each of us in a situation where we weren't comfortable with what was going on with the COVID things, and wanting to be polite and not like walking.
Yes.
And then waving through the window and goes, yes, I will pay for my dentist appointment, but only after you put your mask back on.
Now my wife, I have to interject into this, that my wife is a person who did that. She broke a tooth, and so she made a dental appointment, and she drove into the dentist, and she looked inside and saw people without masks.
Right.
And while sitting in the car, she picked up the phone and said, do I really see people sitting in your office without masks? And they were kind of, well, yeah, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that is an irresponsible thing for them to be doing.
Yes.
There is no way in hell I am going to walk into your office.
Right.
So cancel my appointment and I'm not coming back.
Did she get her tooth fixed, Jeff?
She did get her tooth fixed. She got her, and in fact, she got her tooth fixed. It's one of the things where they did the cap the same day that they did all the rest of it, which is the coolest thing in the world. They've got a computer milling machine where they have the little camera on it. They grind it down, and they have the little camera on a stick that they look in there that does all of the measurements, and then they take it and do the computer aided design thing on it, and then they send it off to the mill, and they mill out the cap, and then they bake it. And so you get this done, and an hour later they've got a fresh, brand spanking new, perfectly designed.
And I have to say, tech like that is all that gets me through experiences like that. I can't say it's so much easier if people are explaining like all the compounds that are used and how they're cured by blue and UV. Like I'm much happier.
Yeah, I'm the one that walks in and says, "Give me the mirror."
Yeah.
So that I can watch what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because if I can watch what you're doing is kind of cool. Like I had caps all across the front here, and it was like, give me the mirror. And I thought it was the coolest thing when all across the front, I looked like, a Dracula 7 times over or something with all of the,
I don't trust anybody. I'm always afraid I'm going to hack them off, and then they're going to get it. But again, that's the kind of thinking that, no one can afford right now. I mean, there's a point to where you have to say, well, I don't want to be rude to somebody not wearing a mask, because, well, people need to be, confronted about those things. It's not, this is not a game,
But you hit, taking it back a couple of minutes, you hit on a thing that I had never really thought about. And that is, we talk about police departments as needing to be reformed, where the police are only doing the thing that's appropriate for police and things to be spread out for other services. I had never really made the connection between that and education.
Well, and even teachers in general.
There's a lot of overlap there. The organizations that you might want to form so they can take over that stuff for the police.
And what we think sometimes about
teachers,
in a lot of
cases, the same you need for education.
About educators in general, that, well, of course they show up after school and do things, and they do these activities, and they grade papers over the weekends and on their breaks and things. And we don't pay them for those things. And that's just, teachers do that because they care about their students. And I think it's inappropriate in that context. And it's even more so now, this notion that somehow, teachers are not supposed to object to being put into a situation where they're in an unsafe work environment. And, and there will be that expectation that, if you want to continue in this career, some of you can do it from home, but, some of you are going to have to come in and expose yourselves to children and their families. And I think that, I'm not sure how you make that work, or how the school districts are completely insulated from that, and saying that, I told you that I had pre-existing conditions and I didn't want to be in a classroom, and you made me do that anyway, and now I'm sick.
Although an interesting thing, I don't know that.
Will we sign waivers? Is that what we're going to ask?
I suspect you are. Because I don't know that, but I do know that when the Arizona Department of Education came out with their guidelines for, okay, when you open up, these are the things that you have to do, and so on and so forth. At the bottom of it, they said, this is not a legal document. This is not a legal opinion. Following these guidelines does not absolve you of legal responsibility.
Right.
And so they came right out and said, this is what we are telling you to do. But if somebody sues your ass, we're not going to stand with you. And I don't know, if I were sitting on a school board and I saw a document like that, even if I didn't understand anything about the disease, I'd say, no way I'm gonna sign off for something like that.
That's my point. And Jill, I think you're right that a lot of this comes down to, if people would, I tell my mother this all the time, if people would just do what they're supposed to do for a long enough period of time, we can eventually get the spread down to a place where we can, do the kind of tracking that's necessary. And we could do, and this is what's so amazing to me about arguing with a conservative mindset in this country at the moment. It always requires that you ignore the existence of the rest of the world, that you pretend like they don't really exist. That every other country in the world didn't bring their curve all the way down again to a reasonable place by doing all the things that we're choosing not to do, and therefore we're in a much better place to make those decisions. And that's really where it is. They have, and so we have those models. We can look at them and say, if we will just do these things, we can get to a place in a reasonable period of time where at least we can begin to make logical decisions about what can reopen and what can exist. But I think, to say that time is going to be August the 17th, I think is just, it's just magical, bizarro thinking.
Well, but what's new about what you just said? You could have taken everything you just said and substitute universal health care into that statement.
Which, again, might be another good thing that comes of this. I think that maybe finally we're looking at all this and saying, maybe it's a problem that everyone can't go to the doctor in this country. That maybe if as soon as people were sick, they went to the doctor and got tested, and maybe it'd be good if we had a national database that would come from, having nationalized healthcare, like, again, every other civilized nation in the world. That maybe, we finally look at these things and say, it's time. So, the hopeful part of me is saying that perhaps, the aftermath of this crisis, might finally be the impetus we need to say, maybe we need a culture that cares about its people.
It feels to me a little bit, though, at the minute, because 50,000 new cases yesterday, cricket noises from the federal government. It's like having a melanoma and they're ignoring that. The faster you take care of it, the less horrible the treatment is going to be. It could be that all you have to do is just slice it off and put a Band-Aid on it. We're past that one. Right. But the more you ignore a problem, which it has a physical root cause, the harder curing it or beating it back is going to be.
Watching the Vice President of the United States struggle so hard not to have to say the word mask. I don't know if you saw that, but you could see, the acrobatics going on in somebody's head. That, how can I make sure I always say something obscure like facial covering, and so I don't, have to say the naughty word, that would, help people.
But that kind of doesn't that kind of go back to not having the intestinal fortitude when you're in the dentist office to say,
Yes.
screw this, I'm out the door. If you want me to pay, you know, we should be saying mask. You know, every
Yeah.
time you get an opportunity, you say, don't you understand that you are making other people sick? Put on your mask.
Well, and again, that's going on in other
why do
places.
we
That
why
it's
do
all
we dance
uniquely
around
us.
stuff?
You know, in the same way that people don't understand why we're not upset when a bunch of guys with automatic rifles storm a state capitol. You know, why we don't say perhaps a legislative solution might be in the offing. You know, but,
Do you I know that Jeri has heard this one. The limerick, a mob of the MAGA persuasion conducted a state house invasion. Though heavily armed, they all left unharmed. And that's how we know they're Caucasian.
yeah, very much. And so, you know, I'd like to think that a great many things are going to, you know, are coming to a tipping point in a way that only perhaps an international health crisis could bring about. You know, it's the only thing that, you know, that makes me feel at all hopeful in all of this is that.
Yeah, the fact that maybe we can't drag all the garbage through the small hole that we have to go through, and
Yes.
and no matter how much some people want to, that maybe,
Because, you know, when cases come down to an acceptable place, yes, we could probably bring kids back into school a half a classroom maybe at a time or less. You know, but to pretend that somehow that won't require more money or more staffing or more, you know, a technology available to the public or any of those things is, you know, it's just insanity.
And here
You know,
we are in a place where we have the resources for this.
Yes.
We have the resources to actually do that. Nobody starves. Nobody can have, you know, we can get people their tests. We can get things that we need for our schools. We can start over with the idea that, gosh, I really appreciate school. I really appreciate teachers. There are people that will probably want to go back into that career, feeling that they can make a real difference. And those are the things that you know, could really be
everyone
good.
I know
But
who teaches was hurt by not being able to say goodbye to their children properly. Everyone in this business, you know, is deeply concerned and is dedicated to the job they're doing. You don't get into education for any other reason. It certainly isn't the big money. You know, so, you know, everyone has that going for them. It's just that I think it's a bridge too far to say you need to risk the health of yourself and your family.
You need to die so we can get kids back in by August. It's not reasonable.
Yes.
But
and
Jeri,
I
I want to touch on something. You said we have the resources.
Yeah.
Expand on what you mean by that.
Oh, I actually really do mean that the United States as a whole has resources to take some of it away from it is national defense. Take some from national defense.
Well,
take
our staggering wealth.
Yeah,
you know, people don't appreciate what a billion is when we talk about billions of dollars. You know, we have a lot of money.
Don't wait until there's some occasional billionaire who likes to endow something that's actually useful because they feel like doing it. Take taxes. I mean, I pay vasto amounts of taxes myself, and so you know, there are monetary resources. There are human resources too. There are people who maybe they're out of jobs at the minute, but they're certainly intelligent, trainable people who could do the things that help build the structures for cleaner energy, for better education, for health, for I mean, we really do have the ability to spend and tax and use money intelligently.
Use socialist.
We only had somebody intelligent.
We've done it before.
Socialist
it's a New Deal kind of, you know, a use of the federal government to put people to work to get to, you know, to get things going, and it's true.
I know, but there are certainly people out there who would listen to everything we just said, which sounds perfectly obvious and reasonable to all of us, and their response would be a bunch of blankety blank socialists. So what's the response to that?
But at the same time, so many people. I mean, there are actually quite a few people that are coming to realize that, you know, having affordable care has actually made a positive difference to me. Having some of these other things has helped my community wherever it is, and realizing that, having a little bit of extra resource is just actually going to build your ability to do what you wanted to do, to take that, to build that business, to improve your farm, to go and study that thing that you wanted to study, or that play you wanted to do, or I mean,
it's using words like socialism to vilify things. Why? What's the problem with, especially in a situation like this, where we realize that really is our problem, with investing in the people that live in this country, with investing in the resources to make lives better, for actual human beings. And over and over again, historically, we have found that to be remarkably cost effective as well. There's almost never been a situation, when they first, every time they talk about raising minimum wage, it's always the same argument that it's going to destroy industry and it's going to ruin the economy and yada, yada, yada. The argument comes out every time. And every time the result has been exactly the opposite. Every single time. And I think that there's a point to where we look at the rest of the world's success in dealing with this virus and our own abysmal failure. And maybe it's time to say, hey, maybe, we should live in a country that invests, more of its, fabulous wealth in its actual citizens.
I mean, I cannot agree more. First of all, viewing it as national defense is clearly the right way to view it.
Oh, absolutely. I believe our president himself called it going to war, that he labeled himself a wartime president.
Right.
Right before he didn't do anything.
Before he surrendered. Yes. Right. But I mean, one of the ways that I think about this in a bunch of ways, but one of the ways I think about this is that you look going back to about 1980, and since that time, worker productivity in the United States has roughly doubled, while at the same time, worker compensation has remained flat.
Good.
And if you look at that, and that had not been the case prior, up until about 1980, the two had pretty well tracked each other. And you look at that and it's like, okay, where did all of that wealth go? Well, we know where all of that wealth went because we understand that we have another Gilded Age, that there is that level of wealth inequality.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I look at what we're talking about here, first of all, you talk to a lot of conservatives and they say, what's their time that they like? Well, I really like the 1950s. In the 1950s, the top marginal tax rate was 90%, for crying out loud. And we use that to build all of the infrastructure and to do all of the stuff that they then wound up benefiting. The other thing, though, is that,
and there were still plenty of rich people too during that. I don't think we had a shortage of rich people.
I'm sorry, but instead of having umpty billion dollars, you only have umpty billion dollars. I think you could probably still keep the house in the Maldives for, at that point. The other thing, though, is that if you look at it, we're basically talking about back wages in a very real sense. That for a long time, people have been working very, very, very hard, and the fruits of their labor have been going into these big piles of wealth. And now it is time that some of those big piles of wealth are used to actually help the society that allowed those people to accumulate those big piles of wealth. And that does not sound to me like it should be a radical idea.
I like putting that straight out in black and white, that you're not giving money to people who are lazy and never did anything. And by the way, that's not a category.
Right.
Human beings like to be useful, and and there are very few people that are, and anybody that would be trying to do something that you would be considered to be a little odd about the system probably has a reason to distrust the system. So because it has not been fair to them. So the idea that people are getting payback for something that people have been coasting and taking the wages away from them for a long time is a really good way of looking at it.
Well, and frankly, what people are always talking about when they're talking about cutting taxes for everyone but me is that we, that we should want, to hold on to our own money. And it's not so much that. I would simply like the money that I pay in taxes to be used for the for the betterment of the country and the world that I live in. I used to teach my students that, we have a tendency to vilify even the word taxes in this country. And the idea is that it is money that we collect for the public good. It's the money that we pool together to do things that we cannot all do alone. And the thing that one of the things that we can't do alone right now is
COVID.
anything about this COVID crisis. And so, that's what that money is for. For us to mobilize those sources.
I do tell my children whenever we're doing the taxes that it isn't the number that bothers me. It's the fact that it's not going to where it should.
Right.
That bothers me. So, yeah.
And, and maybe that's finally what comes of this, is that we begin to look at these things and say maybe those kinds of ideas shouldn't be so vilified. And there was a time, after World War II, that the country believed strongly enough that way that what we managed to do was put together the greatest generation. Maybe this is our crisis.
You're right at the minute. I don't feel that. I don't feel that we actually have a Republican Party. What it was is not what it is now.
Right.
We basically have kind of the really rich people wanting to preserve wealth and power, and the rest of us. So if we can elect the rest of us, then we can get to the point where we can discuss how we want to implement things of our future. We may have different opinions about how to do that and where the money should go, but we'd be back to a place where we actually really did have a two-party system instead of a.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of evidence that these radical ideas that we're talking about are supported by the vast majority of the actual people that live in this country.
Yes. And with that, I'm going to look up at the clock and realize that we have been at this thing now for an hour.
Okay.
As crazy as that may sound.
Well, don't get me started.
Don't. And I'm gonna do a happy hour later today with a guy that I know who's the executive director of the International Association of School Business Officials. And maybe what I should do is I should just send him a link to this thing before we get together. Say, all right, we can just, we can skip the first hour of conversation if you just listen to this, and then we can.
Had it already.
Had it already.
It was fun wandering around with you guys. So.
Yes.
Yeah, great fun. I will look forward to doing it again, hopefully many times. And for folk out there, the few who are listening live, people who hopefully will listen to this downstream, help us get the word out. I think we've got good chemistry. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this. So,
and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing about more of your national meetings about the education, and if people were, trying to go through
we will find out how all of that goes. Who knows?
Well, take care.
Maybe next week I'll be talking about all of this fun stuff that happened over the weekend, and maybe next week I will show up with,
wear a mask, wash your hands.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
You betcha. Okay, guys. So I will